Tonight, I'm not just showing you abandoned places. I'm taking you inside locations people were never meant to explore. These aren't just stories, they're real, documented histories with details most videos ignore. The deeper we go, the stranger it gets. So stay till the end, because some truths are genuinely unsettling. If you want to explore more real haunted places and chilling stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the adventure. 1. The Ridges, Athens Lunatic Asylum. I remember the exact moment I stepped onto the grounds because something felt wrong before I even reached the building. It wasn't fear at first, it was more like pressure, like the air was heavier than it should be. The place looked quiet from a distance, almost peaceful, but the closer I got, the more that feeling grew. I had read about this hospital before coming here. Built in the late 1800s, it once held thousands of patients. Back then, people weren't always sent here because they were dangerous. Sometimes it was depression, anxiety, or even behavior that didn't fit society. And once they were inside, many never left. I kept thinking about that as I walked toward one of the abandoned sections. The windows were broken in some places, and the walls had started to decay, but the structure was still standing strong, like it refused to fall apart completely. My footsteps slowed down without me realizing it. When I finally stepped inside, the temperature dropped. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. The air smelled old, like dust and damp wood. Every step echoed through the hallway, and that echo made it feel like someone else was walking just a second behind me. I stopped once, just to listen. Nothing. But the silence didn't feel empty. I moved deeper inside, passing rooms that were once patient wards. I tried to imagine what it must have been like here decades ago. Crowded hallways, patients with no privacy, doctors using treatments that today would be considered cruel. Records show the hospital became severely overcrowded. People were placed wherever there was space, even in hallways. And somehow, that history didn't feel like history anymore. It felt present. I reached the corridor where room 20 was located, and I already knew what had happened there. In 1979, a patient named Margaret Schilling disappeared inside the building. Staff searched for her, but no one could find her in time. Weeks later, they finally discovered her body in that very room. By then, it was too late. What stayed with people wasn't just her death, but what it left behind. As her body decomposed, it created a stain on the floor, a human-shaped outline that, according to reports, could never be fully removed. I didn't believe that part completely, until I saw it. The room itself looked ordinary at first, just another empty space with worn walls and a damaged floor. But then I noticed it, faint but still there, a shape that didn't belong. I walked closer without thinking, and that's when the feeling changed. It wasn't just heavy anymore, it was focused, like all the weight I felt outside had been waiting for me in that exact spot. My chest tightened, and for a second I forgot why I came there. I told myself it was just the story getting into my head, but then I noticed something else. The silence in that room was different. It didn't echo like the hallway. My footsteps sounded dull, almost swallowed. I spoke quietly just to test it, and even my own voice didn't sound right. It felt like the room was holding on to sound, not letting it leave. That's when I stepped back, and as soon as I did, the feeling eased slightly. I stood there for a moment, staring at the outline again, trying to make sense of what I was experiencing. Everything about it had an explanation. The history was real, the death was documented, the stain, even if unusual, could still be explained. But the way it felt standing there, that didn't make sense. I didn't stay much longer after that. As I walked back through the hallway, the echoes returned. The air felt normal again, and when I finally stepped outside, that heavy pressure I felt at the beginning, it was gone. Completely gone. I remember turning back one last time, looking at the building from a distance. It looked empty again, quiet, like nothing had ever happened there. But I knew better, because whatever was inside that room didn't need to move. It just needed someone to walk in and feel it. Two-story Ohio State Reformatory. I didn't expect a prison to feel this alive. From the outside, the building looked massive, almost like a castle. But the closer I got, the more it started to feel less like a structure and more like something that had been holding on to people for far too long. I had seen pictures before, but standing in front of it was different. It didn't look abandoned, it looked paused. This place opened in 1896. Thousands of inmates were kept here over the years. Some of them were criminals, yes, but many were just young men who made small mistakes and were sent here hoping to be reformed. That was the idea. But the reality was something else. As I stepped inside, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Old metal, dust, and something damp. The air felt thick, like it hadn't fully moved in years. My footsteps echoed instantly, bouncing off the high walls and iron bars. I looked up and froze for a second. The cell blocks stretched higher than I expected, tier after tier of small cages stacked on top of each other. It felt endless. I tried to imagine what it must have been like when every single one of those cells was filled. Then I remembered something I had read before coming here. At one point, this prison was severely overcrowded, designed for around 1,500 inmates, but holding over 2,000. People were packed into small spaces, sometimes 2 or 3 in a cell meant for one. There was little ventilation, poor hygiene, and diseases spread quickly. Standing there, it wasn't hard to believe. I started walking along one of the rows. Each cell looked the same, tight, dark, and cold. Some still had rusted bed frames inside. I stopped at one and stepped closer, holding the bars for a second. The metal was freezing, and for some reason, that made everything feel more real. I kept thinking about how many people had stood exactly where I was standing, holding those same bars, looking out, waiting for time to pass, or maybe just waiting for it to end. As I moved deeper into the prison, the atmosphere started to change. It wasn't sudden, but I could feel it building. The further I went, the quieter it became. Not peaceful quiet, but heavy quiet. I reached one of the isolation areas. This was where inmates were sent as punishment. Solitary confinement. Small spaces, almost no light, and sometimes complete silence for days. It was meant to break people, and according to records, it did. I stepped into one of those areas and immediately felt uncomfortable. The air felt tighter, like the space itself was closing in. I didn't even stay fully inside. Just standing at the entrance was enough. I tried to imagine being locked in there. No sound, no movement, just your own thoughts. That's when I noticed something strange. My footsteps didn't echo the same way here. In the main cell blocks, every sound bounced around. But here, it felt muted, like the walls were absorbing everything. Even my breathing sounded different. I took a step back, and that's when I heard it. A faint metallic sound, like something lightly hitting iron. I froze. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but it was enough to make me stop completely. I listened carefully, trying to figure out where it came from. Nothing. Just silence again. I told myself it was probably something falling somewhere in the building. Old structures make noise all the time. That made sense. But it didn't feel like that, because the sound came at the exact moment I stepped back from the cell. I didn't wait to hear it again. I started walking back toward the main area, faster than before. The echoes returned, the air felt more open, and that pressure slowly faded. But I didn't stop until I reached the entrance. When I finally stepped outside, I took a deep breath without even realizing it. The air felt normal again. I turned back and looked at the building one last time. From the outside, it looked empty, silent, just an old prison with a long history. But after being inside, I couldn't see it that way anymore. Because places like this don't just hold history. They hold everything that happened inside them, and some of it doesn't leave. 3-story Franklin Castle. I didn't expect a house to feel this personal. From the street, it looked like something out of another time. Tall, dark, and quiet. The kind of place you'd stop and stare at, but never walk too close to. I'd read about it before coming here, built in the late 1800s by a man named Hans Tiedemann, a wealthy businessman, a family man. At least, that's how the story starts. But the more I learned, the more that image started to break. I stood across the road for a few minutes before moving closer. It didn't feel abandoned, even though no one was outside. The windows were still, the structure solid, but there was something about it that felt closed off. Not physically, but emotionally, like it didn't want attention. I finally walked up to the edge of the property, careful not to cross any boundaries. It's privately owned now, and entry isn't allowed. But even from outside, it felt like enough. Because the history of this place isn't normal. Hans Tiedemann lived here with his family. Over time, several members of that family died under unusual circumstances. His young daughter, his wife, other relatives. Records confirm multiple deaths within the household, though not all details are clear. That's where the stories begin to split. Some say illness, others say something darker. Standing there, I tried to keep my focus on what was actually documented. Multiple deaths, a family slowly shrinking inside a single house. That alone was enough to make the place feel heavy. I moved slightly to the side, trying to get a better view through one of the windows. It was hard to see anything clearly, but I could make out parts of the interior, dim, still, untouched. And that's when I felt it. That same pressure I've only felt in a few places before. Not fear, but awareness. Like the moment you realize you're not as alone as you thought. I stepped back immediately. There was no sound, no movement, nothing that should have triggered that reaction. But it was there, strong enough that I couldn't ignore it. I tried to rationalize it. Old house, dark history, my mind connecting things that weren't actually happening. That made sense. But then something small changed. One of the windows I had been looking at just seconds ago seemed different. Not open, not broken, just different. Like the reflection had shifted in a way that didn't match where I was standing. I adjusted my position, trying to line it up again. And for a brief moment, I thought I saw movement inside. Not clearly, not enough to describe, but enough to make me stop breathing for a second. I stayed completely still, watching. Nothing. The window looked normal again, empty. I told myself it was just light. Reflections can play tricks, especially on old glass. That explanation came quickly, almost automatically. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. I became very aware of how quiet everything was. No cars passing, no voices, just the house in front of me and that strange, heavy silence around it. I didn't want to stay there any longer. As I turned to leave, I felt that same pressure shift slightly. Not disappear, just move. Like whatever I had been sensing wasn't tied to one spot, but to the place itself. I walked away faster than I planned to, and only when I reached the end of the street did that feeling finally fade. I stopped and looked back one last time. From a distance, it looked normal again. Just an old historic house with a complicated past. Nothing unusual, nothing active. But standing there earlier, just a few steps away, it didn't feel like that at all. Because some places don't need to show you anything obvious. Their history is enough. And if you stand close enough, sometimes you don't just learn it, you feel it.